Shalom. Today we are going to be doing Genesis chapter 4. So let's begin. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 1 reads, And Adam knew Eve his wife. And she conceived, and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. So we see here that Adam and his wife came together and had a child. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 2 says, And she again bare his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So here we see that Eve had a second son named Abel who was a shepherd, and Cain the firstborn was a farmer. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 3 reads, And in process of time it came to pass, that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. So Cain brought an offering to the Most High, of his fruits. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 4 says, And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Precept Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 4 reads, By faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he attained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. So here we see that Abel brought his offering, and it was of good quality unto the Most High. Therefore, the Most High had respect to Abel and his offering. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 5 reads, But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. So here the Most High did not have respect to Cain and his offering because he did not do well, and Cain was angry, which is the meaning of wrath, and his outward appearance fell. Countenance means outward appearance according to 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 7, which reads, But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature. Because I have refused him, for the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. There are other meanings for the word countenance. You can ask me in the comments. Genesis chapter 4 and verse 6 reads, And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth? And why is thy countenance fallen? So the Most High asked Cain why he was angry, and why his appearance changed. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 7 says, If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lies at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. So here the Most High is telling Cain that if he did well he would have been accepted. Then he goes on to explain that if he does not do well, then sin is near unto him, and sin shall be in subjection to him, and Cain shall have rule over sin. This is the same part of the curse received by Eve in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 16, which reads, Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. And thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 8 says, And Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him. So here it says that Cain and Abel were talking in the land, and Cain killed his brother Abel. Here we see the breaking of the commandments for Cain begins, and as we already know, thou shalt not kill, according to Exodus chapter 20 and verse 13, Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 17. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 9 reads, And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not, am I my brother's keeper? So here we see that Cain lies about knowing where his brother was to the Most High, which is bearing false witness or lying according to Exodus chapter 20 and verse 16, and Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 20. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 10 reads, And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood cried unto me from the ground. So the Most High asked Cain what he did, because Abel's spirit cries to him from the ground. Your blood cannot literally cry, so to understand what is being said here we go to Genesis chapter 9 and verse 4, which reads, But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. So here we see that the blood is the life, which is what also holds the spirit. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 11 reads, And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. So here the Most High is pronouncing bad upon Cain, cursing him from the earth, which means that the earth would not yield its strength unto him, as we will see later in this chapter. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 12 reads, When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth. What is a fugitive? A fugitive is a criminal or a person exiled from a place. What is a vagabond? A vagabond is a homeless person or wanderer. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 13 reads, And Cain said unto the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. So here we see Cain is saying that he cannot handle his punishment. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 14 Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass, that every one that findeth me shall slay me. So here Cain is concerned about leaving the part of the earth where the Most High dwells, how he would be considered a criminal and a wanderer, and that the people would kill him. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 15 reads, And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whosoever slayed Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. So here we see the Most High protects Cain by stating that he would take vengeance, meaning revenge upon that person 7 times more, for killing him, and he also put a mark, meaning a number or a name, upon him so that no one would kill him. Mark means number or a name according to Revelation chapter 14 and verse 11, And the smoke of their torment ascended up forever and ever, and they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. So we see here mark means name. Also see Revelation chapter 15 and verse 2, which reads, And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. So here we see mark also means number. Sevenfold means 7 times. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 16 reads, And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden. So here we see the Most High's face is actually his presence, or where he dwells when you compare the verses. What 2 verses are we comparing? Verses 14 with 16. So on the east side of the land of Eden there is a place called Nod, and Cain stayed there. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 17 reads, And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived, and bare Enoch, and he builded a city, and called the name of the city, after the name of his son, Enoch. So it says here that Cain and his wife came together, and they had a son named Enoch. Then Cain built a city inside the land of Nod, and called it after his son's name Enoch. Point to note there were many people in the land at that time, because a city is quite big, which also explains the other trees in the Garden of Eden. Otherwise, where did Cain get a wife from? Genesis chapter 4 in verse 18 says, And unto Enoch was born Arad, and Arad begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Mehujael, and Mehujael begat Lamech. So we see here that out of Cain's descendants eventually came Lamech. Pay attention to this. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 19 reads, And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. So as we see here, the descendants of Cain, that is Lamech, was the first one to start the multiple wives trend, and let's not forget Cain was also of the wicked one, as stated in 1 John chapter 3 and 12, which reads, Not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his own works were evil, and his brother's righteous. Precept. Jude chapter 1 and verse 11 reads, Woe unto them! For they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the heir of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Kor. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 20 reads, And Adah bare Jabal, he was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. So it says that Jabal, which is the son of Lamech, was a man that did business with cattle. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 21 reads, And his brother's name was Jubal, he was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. We also see that his brother's name was Jubal, who was a musician. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 22 reads, And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So here we see that Lamech's second wife had their son Tubal-Cain, who was an artificer, meaning craftsman in brass and iron, example a welder, and he had a sister named Naamah. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 23 reads, And Lamech said unto his wives, Adah and Zillah, Hear my voice. Ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. So here we see that Lamech asked his wives to listen to him, that he had killed a man and a young man. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 24 reads, If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. So here Lamech is saying just as Cain received protection from the Most High so that no one might kill him, then he should also receive more protection for his murder, 70 times 7. You can see the precept for this in Jasher chapter 2 in verses 26 to 36. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 25 reads, And Adam knew his wife again. And she bare a son, and called his name Seth, for God, said she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. So this is saying that Adam and Eve came together again, and had a son named Seth, and the meaning of his name was, the Most High hath appointed. And she thought it was to replace Abel. Genesis chapter 4 in verse 26 says, And to Seth, to him also there was born a son. And he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. So we see here that Seth had a son named Enos. But what does it mean to call upon the name of the Most High? To call upon is a no-brainer, but the word name has many meanings throughout the Bible, but we will just settle for the one that makes the most sense, which is works or deeds according to Psalms chapter 105 and verse 1, which reads, O give thanks unto the Lord. Call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people. You can also find this in Isaiah chapter 12 and verse 4, which reads, And in that day shall ye say, Praise the Lord, call upon his name, declare his doings among the people, make mention that his name is exalted. This is how I study the Bible. To get the proper answers to my questions, if you would like I can show you how as well, just express your interest. This is the end of the study. Shalom.